like
just like that.
I don't. Who would do that? I mean, you got to be just an absolute saint.
Yeah, that's tough work. So, yeah. Well, welcome back.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's good to see you. I missed
I
it.
thought of you guys when I was because you were here while I was there on Friday night. I was like, yeah, we're still sitting at the same.
Julie had the common courtesy to tune in while she was on her retreat.
Ah, yeah, that would have been good. I should have pulled out the phone and just set it on my cushion in front of me.
That's what I'm saying.
And I went over my data usage, and I owe $30 because you just no Wi-Fi there, so I had to hotspot it.
Oh.
Which I would do anyway. I mean, I would do it anyway.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
Well.
And Happy New Year, Les. Good to see you.
Happy New Year, Les.
Thank you, folks. Happy 2020.
Here we are.
New decade.
Here we are, new decade. I'm going to continue our conversation from last week that we started around goodwill metta. You weren't here last week. You tuned in. So it's good. Maybe I'll refresh some of that and then go back. But before we do that, let's sit. If you're interested in doing a metta practice on your own, please do. If you're like, I'm not going to do metta practice, that is fine too. Thank you for your practice. So I sent out an article on the email list. I think it made its way to Facebook as well. That a friend of mine had posted this week. Or at least she had commented on it, or she actually posted it. It's an article critiquing the mindfulness movement, which I think is good. I think it's good to critique what we're doing, and to say, you know, what are some of the issues, and is this really what we mean, to refine our understanding. Buddhism is still fairly new in the West. I mean, it's really only like one lifetime length old. And I think, you know, I've watched this in my own development of practice as I come to understand difficult concepts. I think that's the shortcoming of the particular article. My friend Monica pointed out that the author's understanding of anatta, of the perspective of not self, is a little shallow. Right, the author postulates an ontological view of not self, that mindfulness is saying that there is no self. Which I think one can make a good argument that is not what the early Buddhist suttas are teaching. And you can read some of the articles on dhammatalks.org. Tom Jeff takes this down pretty solidly. But I wasn't so much interested in that critique of mindfulness as I was interested in the critique of the critique. Right? And they were going at mindfulness, saying that mindfulness is just asking us to non-judgmentally pay attention to our thoughts. In other words, we allow thoughts to arise and pass away, and we don't have any perspective on them. We don't have any relationship to them. This is a thought, it arises, it passes away. Which is what I don't think that's what John Kabat-Zinn means by the word non-judgmentally, by the way. I think what he means is something closer to the idea of metta. But I think a lot of people take this statement, you know, paying attention to your experience non-judgmentally, quite literally, just noting experience. And this has benefits. This does have benefits. This particular technique of mindfulness helps us to not identify with thoughts as self, which is very different from saying there is not a self. But it helps us to identify, oh, that's not I, me, or mine, therefore I don't have to get lost in it. So if you're dealing with, say, chronic depression, and you begin to have these sort of thought cascades that lead you into a chronic depressive episode, you don't identify with those, and therefore they don't take you down that path. That's powerful. That's helpful. I think it's very, very beneficial. Same thing with eating disorders and other psychological maladies, addiction, and so forth. But I do agree with the author that mindfulness is sort of marketed as a cure-all. I mean, when it makes the cover of Time magazine, right, with the beautiful white woman sitting in a perfect lotus on a beach, and it's mindfulness, and everyone's like, yeah, mindfulness, it's groovy. I do think that something may get lost. That the context, that the relationship to our experience that is encouraged with Buddhist meditation practice, that there is there are concepts that are greater than just paying attention, which is only one fold of the Eightfold Path, that really help us to flesh out what is my relationship to my experience. And to me, this is the difference between something that is a technique that is helpful and something that is actually transforms my relationship to this unfolding experience that, for the sake of shorthand, I might call self. I think it's very important to have a concept of self. I think that Buddhism never says that there's not a self. It says there's two truths. There's two ways of looking at things, and both are true, dependent on what you're talking about. On a mundane level, I walk around the world saying, I'm Joseph, right? And I live here, and this is my stuff, and I pay my taxes, right? That's very helpful and useful in the world, right? On one hand, that exists. This set of experiences and circumstances that I define is useful. It's useful to have ego strength. We don't want that to diminish. You can easily fall, and I've seen people come into contact with this arising and passing away that is the nature of experience, and they get blown away by it, and it can be frightening. It can even lead to psychosis or a deepening of trauma. Sometimes we need a very strong ego self to have boundaries, to have a strong sense of mental health. It's very helpful. And on a sort of super mundane, ultimate level, we can take that 10,000-foot view and say, yes, this thing that I call self is an unfolding set of circumstances. This thing that I call identity, it's very difficult to point at where it is. If I look at it as a thing, it begins to dissolve. Also true. Which is good for breaking down habits and patterns of mind that are not helpful. Right? So both of these things are true. But this idea that I'm just supposed to have an observational awareness on myself with no relationship to that observation, with no stance, is, from a standpoint of Buddhist meditation, just simply not true. And I do think that there are some important perspectives that are helpful and that also create a base of stability so that when the perspective of not self does begin to unfold, I don't necessarily fall apart because of it. Because I have something broader than just that. If I identify with myself as my stuff and my achievements and my youth, that's not stable. That's going to fall apart very easily, and I will have a crisis of self. I will fall apart. I'll find myself railing at the heavens. Why is this happening to me? It's just unfolding circumstances, man. Don't take it personally. What, do you think that it doesn't happen to you? You think that it doesn't happen to everyone? This is the beauty of, we were talking earlier, the death meditation. And my work is actually constant death meditation. As I work with people in hospital settings and I walk into these rooms where people are very much unraveling in their identities in many ways, I see that this really is the human experience. I go, oh yeah, of course everything is falling apart. Of course you're having these difficulties. Of course there's difficulties in relationships. I mean, we're not even that surprising. We're not even that interesting in one sense of like, yeah, of course that's happening to you. And I feel compassion, and like I don't want bad things to happen to people. I don't want people to have difficulties. I'm not saying that, but it's like that's part of having this body and this life. Right? There's a thing about grief. There's a thing about these bodies fall apart. And we don't know when it's going to happen. There is a certain amount of uncertainty. So I think that in context of understanding uncertainty, it actually calls me to how do I create stability in the middle of that? How do I create something that allows me to stand within that and not be overwhelmed by it? Because of course, if I don't have that stability, I will continue to try to cling to whatever I can to make sure that it doesn't dissipate. Right? People in the hospitals getting mad with the hospitals for being hospitals for giant systems to be, it's like gives you something to do, right? Fight with your insurance company or yell at the nurses or criticize your family, right? Because it's like anything but dealing with the reality of what is. The world is changing rapidly right now. And we see people desperately trying to cling to a notion of what should be and the harm that is caused from that. So there's two suttas that I wanted to talk about tonight. The first is the simile of the spear. There's always these weapon analogies in the suttas. And I have to remember, like, oh yeah, the Buddha was from the warrior class. Right? So of course he and most of his students are also like his cousins and people in his, sort of extended family, who are also warriors. So they would have understood these metaphors. Right? And of course, there's always context. With any teaching, you have to think like, who was he talking to at the time? Right? Like all good teachers, he speaks to his audience. So this is a short sutta. I posted it on the Facebook page and sent it out in an email. It says, monks, suppose there were a sharp-bladed spear, and a man were to come along saying, with my hand or fist I will bend back this sharp-bladed spear, fold it up in two, and roll it up. What do you think? Would that man be able with his hand or fist to bend back that sharp-bladed spear, fold it in two, roll it up? And they're like, no. And he goes, yeah, why is that? Why is that? And they're like, well, because it's not easy to bend back. It's like metal, right? And it's also sharp, right? It's like incredibly sharp. Like you would just funk up your hand, right? He says that the man would simply reap his share of trouble and vexation, right? In other words, it would be frustrating, futile, and you would just fuck up your hands, right? Like, hey, I'm going to fold this like super sharp hunting implement and I'm going to fold it up. It's made of like hardened metal. Yeah, no, you couldn't. Okay, so that's the first part, right? Like you couldn't just come along and fold that up. And he says in the same way, when a monk's awareness through goodwill, through metta, is cultivated, developed, pursued, given a means of transport, given a grounding, steadied, consolidated, well undertaken, any non-human being who would think of deranging that monk's mind would simply reap their share of trouble and vexation. Thus should you train yourselves. Our awareness release through goodwill will be cultivated, developed, pursued, given a means of transport, given a grounding, steadied, consolidated, and well undertaken. That's how you should train yourself. All right, so just as someone couldn't come along and bend up a spear, what he's saying here is these non-human beings, these vexations of life. If we cultivate, develop, pursue, ground, steadied, well undertaken, consolidated, the mindset of metta, of goodwill, then these same things, when they try to fold us up, we're like a sharp spear. It just vexes them. Like is not able to gain any footing. Right? That we should well develop the cultivated sense of goodwill, of metta, of kindness, friendliness towards experience. That sounds to me very different than just meeting my experience with mindfulness. Just allowing the unfolding of experience. There's actually a cultivation of mind that he's very clearly saying, cultivate this mind state. Cultivate this characteristic. So when I hear Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition, non-judgmental, and I've seen Jon Kabat-Zinn, I really think that he's pointing to more of the development of the very stable and wide, grounded, steadied mind of kindness, of metta, of goodwill. So it's not just thoughts arising and passing away, but what is my relationship to those? Is it broad or is it constricted? Are they able to fold me up like a piece of tin foil? Or is my mind steady and sharp through this grounding in metta practice? And I like this perspective. This perspective is saying that, life is uncertain. There is the nature of, don't take this to be self because it's going to be moving and unfolding and shifting and changing. Once we understand that perspective, because again, anatta is a perspective, not a statement that there is no self. It's saying don't look at the self in this fixed way. Don't see it in that way. Understand the nature of this unfolding. And then how do we meet that in a generative way? How do we meet that in a way that doesn't fold me up into a little ball of foil, constricted and fallen in? But how do I allow myself to be in the midst of that? I think it's very clear when I read the early Buddhist suttas that the Buddha is never saying, hey, just whatever's arising is arising and passing away. Just note it, right? I mean, noting practice is important, right? Mindfulness is valuable for watching this process. But he's not saying just do that. And of course, the other thing that this author fails to talk about is that mindfulness research has moved on past mindfulness. If you go to the leading conferences where they're presenting the leading edge, cutting edge research, because remember, research with the public hears is always 10 years behind where the researchers are at least. The last conference that I went to in San Diego with the Dalai Lama's Mind Life Institute, everyone was talking about developing the mind of what they call LKM, because they're scientists and they like, acronyms. Stands for loving kindness meditation. Because God forbid you be a scientist and you start talking about loving kindness, right? That just does not sound scientific. But they've started to realize, mindfulness is not enough. There has to be this other quality that is developed that is able to hold all of these things so that we do not become constricted. That is how you should train yourselves. It says it very clearly. You should develop this mind of goodwill. That sounds very intentional. It sounds like my attitude with which I meet experience is developed, is cultivated. It's not just, hey man, whatever's happening is happening, noting, arising, passing away. The suttas talk about people who misunderstand this concept of anatta. A group of monks hear this teaching on not self, and they think, oh, well, I don't exist, so really what the Buddha's saying is just go kill yourself. And they go kill themselves, and he's like, yeah, no, that's not what I'm saying. Right? No, that's clearly not what I'm saying. Right? It's not nihilism. To say that there is no self, to make an ontological statement, there is no self, is nihilism, and it's in direct contradiction to the middle path of the Buddha. And this idea that we don't want to teach the entirety of the path because, God forbid, they find out that what we're really teaching is Buddhist meditation, no matter what we call it. We're going to get kicked out of all the prisons and all the schools and all the therapy centers. But it's not a secret. It's not a secret. John Kabat-Zinn's like, oh, I'm not a Buddhist. But I hear him talk. I'm like, dude, you're totally a Buddhist. You're 100% a Buddhist. And you go on Buddhist meditation retreats and you're talking about the Eightfold Path.
He did a presentation with Jack Kornfield and Trudy Goodman a while ago.
Yeah.
Don't they move in the same circle?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But we want to sanitize things. But the problem with that is when you take it out of its context, you begin to have some problems. Because what happens is that people start to discover that there are abreactions to mindfulness. There are people who go on meditation retreats who should not be on meditation retreats. They've had a recent death, they've had a recent trauma, and they go psychotic. You take away their ability to co-regulate with other people, and their sense of self does dissolve, and they go cuckoo. That's not good. You don't want that. That's not helpful. Right? Remember that the Buddha didn't teach meditation to lay people. What did he teach? He taught merit. Right? Generosity, ethics, and kindness. Boom. Until you have that base of practice really well established and stabilized, you shouldn't do this. To this day, people are not accepted into the Buddhist Sangha, the community of monks and nuns, who have serious mental illness. They're not allowed in. They're like, this is not appropriate for you. Right? And of course, a lot of people are really looking for a cure for deep suffering. And so they'll latch on to anything. And what hasn't been talked about openly, because everybody's so busy trying to sell books and meditation retreats, is that this practice is not for everybody and it's not for every occasion. And there are certain times you shouldn't do this. And sometimes you should go see a therapist. And sometimes you should take medication. And sometimes you should go for, some weight training. The idea that that mindfulness is a cure-all for everything, of course, is ridiculous. And what we're now beginning to talk about is like, we have to teach meditation in a way that recognizes these ab reactions, that recognizes the difficulties that people have. For example, that not everyone should focus on the breath. I mean, any teacher will tell you you can use other objects beside the breath. But what do they teach? They teach the breath. And then if somebody comes in and they go, hey, the breath's not working, they go, oh, just, focus on sound. So rather than giving that instruction up front, somebody's sitting there going, man, I would focus on the breath, but I was choked out by my stepfather when I was 5, and it's fucking terrible. Or I drowned, or I was intubated, or whatever it was. And I can't do this. And then they go, I can't meditate. There must be something wrong with me. Instead of teachers acknowledging like these things are real and these difficulties are real, and if we're not grounding our teachings in kindness, if we're not grounding our teachings in ethics, if we're not grounding our teaching in generosity, then we're going to have some difficulties. I remember, I think it was Sharon Salzberg, who was talking about how she was really struggling with this idea of just sort of like, just sit with the pain, just be with what is present, right? And just, and she's like suffering. I think she had like a knee pain, and she was just trying to be with the pain and trying to be with the pain and trying to be with the pain. And she's on this retreat with this very strict Zen teacher. And so she's convinced that that's what he wants, right? She's projected onto him and the practice that it's just, just be with what is. And there's something wrong with her, that she can't make space for this. And so eventually she goes to the teacher and she's like, I'm trying to sit with the pain and it's really overwhelming me. And he goes, well, is there any place in the body that doesn't feel pain? And she goes, oh yeah, there's all these other places. And he goes, well, focus on that. And then when your mind steadies, right, when you're able to be with what is good, then come back to the pain and see if you can touch it. Right? Establish the mind in the stability of goodwill. Cultivate it, develop it, pursue it, ground in it, steady in it, consolidate it. The other thing that I think that people get confused about is this idea that, I'm just going to be with my thoughts, but, it's just, whatever I'm doing in my life, I'm just going to be with that, right? I mean, this idea of like teaching mindfulness, the one that sticks out to me and that I've used as an example before is teaching mindfulness to snipers so that they become better snipers. And it does. It makes them better snipers. It doesn't give them any less PTSD, but it makes them better snipers. Right? There's also this teaching that I am responsible for my actions, and that if I don't ground my actions in ethics, I'm going to suffer about it. It's like if you're sitting there in meditation and you're suffering about what an asshole you've been, that's not going to stop unless you change. Right? Like there is a responsibility for my actions that I own. It's not just, just pay attention to my thoughts. And he talks about this in this sutta called the salt crystal. He says, monks, for anyone who says in whatever way a person makes karma, right? Whatever way they take action, that is how it is experienced. In other words, whatever I do, that's just how it is. There are those people. I just did that. Whatever. It's what I do. And he says, for that person, there is no living of the holy life. No opportunity for the right ending of stress. That's so judgy. The Buddha's being so judgy right there, right? But he's saying it pretty clearly. He says, but for anyone who says, when a person makes karma to be felt in such and such a way, that is how its result is experienced. In other words, when I do something, there's a consequence for which I am responsible. There is the living of the holy life. There is the opportunity for the right ending of stress. And he goes on, right? So I mean, this is very different than just pay attention to your thoughts, right? I mean, he's beginning to talk about ethics and responsibility. He goes on, and I think it's really interesting. There is the case where a trifling evil done by a certain individual takes him to hell, right? There are certain people when things happen, like it completely knocks them off course. There is the same case where the very same sort of trifling deed done by another individual is experienced in the here and now, and for the most part barely appears for a moment. So he's talking about a very stable practice and a very unstable practice. And he says, now a trifling evil done by what sort of individual takes him to hell? There is a case where a certain individual is undeveloped in body, undeveloped in virtue, undeveloped in mind, undeveloped in discernment, restricted, small-hearted, dwelling with suffering. Right? So for the person who has not developed their mind, their heart, their ability to discern, and their virtue, their ethical practice, they're going to be knocked off balance by these things. It's not stable. He's saying, but what about that other person? The person who's not knocked down by these things, right? There is the case where a certain individual is developed in body, is developed in virtue, is developed in mind, is developed in discernment, unrestricted, large-hearted, dwelling with the immeasurable. A trifling evil deed done by this sort of individual is experienced in the here and now, and for the most part barely appears for the moment. He gives 3 examples of this. He says, if you got a cup of water and I pour a tablespoon of salt in it and you drink it, what's it going to taste like?
Really salty.
Fucking salty. Right?
Yeah.
What if I take a tablespoon of salt and I pour it in the Ganges River, the Colorado River since we're local, right? In the Colorado River. When you turn on your tap and you take a drink of water, you going to taste that salt? No. Right? He's saying that there has to be this broader context in order to be transformed, in order for us to not be knocked down by the inevitable mistakes and difficulties and character flaws and conditioning that I have to be grounded in this larger context.
I tried to read that earlier and I could not get it.
It's
That
tough.
helps, yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. It's like because you all of a sudden you get caught up in like, we come from this Judeo-Christian sort of judgy hell place. So you like all of a sudden you're like, wait, Buddhism's talking about hell, and you just get caught up in that, right? Or it's like, what is he really talking about here, right?
Yeah.
And it's subtle distinctions.
I just didn't make the connection that the Ganges River was symbolic for having a stable understanding and a broader base or whatever.
Yeah, he's saying that he's equating this discernment, this grounding in virtue, in developing of the mind, in developing of the body, and our right understanding of it, that's like being the Ganges River, where that salt that gets thrown in, it's not going to throw you off balance. If we're going to live the holy life, in other words, if we're going to have practice, it cannot be divorced from this larger context. Right? If I'm just like going into a mental health facility and I'm just like teaching mindfulness once a week and it's like a little technique, it's like that's good, but that's not enough for me to really transform my relationship with experience. That there has to be this greater grounding, again, in kindness, in ethics, in generosity. That I have to develop the practice in a systemic way, not in just like, oh, just notice that, right? And then he gives 2 other metaphors. He says it's like a person who hasn't developed their mind and their ethics. It's like a poor person who gets fined, right? Like they're going to end up in jail. Whereas the rich person's like, yeah, go ahead, pay the fine. Who cares? Right? It's just that all these metaphors are very broad. Like it gives us this very wide broad, stabilized awareness. And that's my experience with the development of both goodwill and of ethics. That it provides me with a protection, that it provides me with a stabilization of mind, so that when inevitably the difficulties of life do arise, I'm not thrown off balance by them. So that I am able to come into relationship with my experience and experience it and be in right relationship with it. To say that that isn't part of the path is to throw away the entire middle part of the Eightfold Path. 3 folds of the path have to do with your actions. Have to do with what, it's like, they basically say in 3 different ways, don't be an asshole. Right? Like, it basically says like your entire life is a practice where you work, right? What you say, and basically everything you do needs to be in line with this development of wise action, which is rooted, as I talked about last week, in kindness, in goodwill. Right? That goodwill offers us that base that we then develop in our life. And if I'm not developing that, then I'm not on this path. I can go sit all I want. But it's going to be pretty salty. It's going to be pretty salty. Right? Because I need something to hold this perspective of anatta, which is a little unsettling when one encounters it. If I don't have that base, and I want to get back to this article, it's like, if you're just teaching this, anatta is going to be very unstable when you develop that perspective. You're going to be like, whoa, what is that? If I'm not grounded in deep kindness and goodwill, if I don't see myself reflected in the entirety of the world and relate to it in the same way I would relate to myself, if I'm not deeply grounded in ethical practice, not for you, but for me and my well-being, not so that I can be a good person, but so that I'm not creating further harm for myself, then this path is not going to be transformational. And there's only 5 renunciations you have to make as a layperson. It's not like you're a monk and you've got 227. Right? I mean, it's not even that hard. It's not even that hard. And they're not even renunciations so much as they are like letting go of that which is causing me suffering. I'm so attached to that. So this understanding that my actions and my attitude are also to be developed in conjunction with wise mindfulness. That these things are really systemically intertwined. And that I'm just as much of a practitioner if I'm developing my heart or my ethics as if I am sitting on a cushion. Maybe I can't do that. Maybe my practice right now is I really need to kind of work on some renunciation. Right? There's a lot there. That's very much deeply practiced. And it eliminates a lot of the big capital S suffering in my life, right? When I start to let go of those things that cause me suffering, I suffer less. Right? They say that taking the precepts, it's like a protective shield. Right? It doesn't mean that bad stuff's not going to happen to you, but it's just not going to hurt as much. right? It's just going to keep you a little bit safer. And I found that to be true. And maybe that sounds like magical thinking, but I've seen it happen. I've seen the truth of it. Go to Spirit Rock. Go do a retreat there. And check out the deer. And the deer are the most mellow animals I've ever seen. You walk right up to them, they don't care. You know why? Because nobody hurts them. Everybody who goes there takes the precepts and they vow not to hurt other living beings. And it's not like the deer speak English. It's not like somebody's like, hey, you're safe here. Like the deer just know. They're like, this is safe. These people, whatever. They're kind of weird just walking back and forth, but like, they're chill. Right? Even the lizards. I'd be doing my walking practice behind the hall there, and like the lizards are in the middle of the path doing the lizard push-ups, you know? And like I walk up on them and they're like, hey, what's up? Like they don't run away. They're like, you're not going to step on me. I'm good. And that base, you know, when you're practicing in that environment, everybody around you is like this field of energy that starts to build, like the ability to concentrate, the ability to drop into practice. It just deepens. And this arising and passing away, it's like, yeah, I'm like the spear. Doesn't bother me in the least. Because I'm no longer consumed with the question of who am I and what am I and how do I get all this stuff to prove that I need to exist. And instead I come into a nature of being that in and of itself is satisfactory. That in and of itself needs nothing. Fears nothing. Holds everything. Is spacious and open. I'm sure science will come along and prove us right at some point.
10 years from now.
10 years from now. And everyone will jump on that bandwagon, and then surprise, surprise, there won't be a cure-all because it's an eightfold path. It's a fully integrated path, right? So those are some of my thoughts on the development of wise understanding action and goodwill, and their importance of these perspectives in meeting my experience. Any comments or questions in the couple of minutes we have about that?
One of the things that came up when I was reading the article that woman was, at a very subtle level, as I was reading what she was saying, I was thinking, you know, the storytelling ability of our mind is just like you can't underestimate. Mm-hmm. It's hard to even, and that's what I was kind of saying about day two. It's like it's so concentrated. As you're saying too about day 7, whatever, Spirit Rock and all that. Not that she was doing this, but that just don't underestimate the storytelling aspect of the mind, so so to be able to cut through all of that, or, if you can ever cut through all of it, I just feel like it's an element that adds, like, oh, I'm letting go, I'm noticing my thoughts, I'm letting go. It's like, are you? I don't know if you are or not, but, there's so much more to it. And by the way, you could be telling me, delusion is immeasurable.
Immeasurable.
I got it.
Yeah. It's true.
I don't know. She brought up some really good points.
I think there's some excellent points in the article, and I think that there's also some critiques of the article that can be made, obviously. And I think that why should we be afraid of this discussion? Because I think there's a lot of reactivity, like, oh, there's nothing wrong with mindfulness. Well, Why? Why is there nothing wrong with mindfulness? Maybe this will help deepen our understanding of the practice. And there is a growing body of literature that is critiquing mindfulness, and I'm glad for that. We should have that. That's important to understand that not everybody reacts positively to mindfulness. That's good information. Because how do we work with that?
Do you think the people will be redirected to dig into Buddhism deeper?
Maybe. Maybe, perhaps.
I don't want to be careless about it.
It could be. I mean, I don't think everybody needs to be a Buddhist.
But the point is so valid. If there's no foundation, if there's not a framework, something to rest on, it's compromised.
And this is why I think that it's important to understand that the framework, as this author is saying, is not anatta. Anatta is a perspective that one holds. But even that is not who will say that, or Tibetan practitioners say, anatta is the entirety of the path. And I don't think that that's accurate in terms of early Buddhist suttas. And I think as lay people, that this perspective of these two suttas, of the development of the heart of goodwill and the action of ethics, is important and to be cultivated, and is just as valid a part of the path as meditation. Meditation is important. Mindfulness is important. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we've emphasized this one thing at the detriment of an entirety of a path for a goal which I understand, right? So we want to teach this thing that is helpful in a way that is not Buddhism, right? We want to teach secular mindfulness so that the benefits of this practice can be spread to all people of all beliefs. But to take it out of its context is also to remove something from it. So I'm not saying that people have to become a Buddhist. I'm just saying that there is more within Buddhism that supports the practice. And that if people are interested in the practice, that I would encourage them to deepen and broaden their understanding of the entirety of the path.
And because they might have a better chance of success, too.
Well, and more stability of mind. And so when these abreactions do come up, that they have some stability to stand in, right? Because that bell curve, on the outside, at some point that's going to be you. Those points that are the outliers, right? That's going to be you, right? And if you've just been told, well, you're not doing it right, you're going to turn that inward to yourself. There's something wrong with me, and I just need to focus on my painful knee that much more, right? And we love drive vipassana. We love this idea of just, grinding away at practice. And it doesn't have to be a grind. That's the thing that my own personal critique of this, of the way that this practice is taught, is it's so dry. It's just so it's such a slog. Fuck that. I'm not interested. Why can't this be a juicy path? Why can't this be a heartful, exuberant, embodied path? Which makes mindfulness a hell of a lot easier. Why do I got to suffer so much about ending suffering? That is, of course, because there's already going to be enough of that. The spiritual work is fucking, you got to look at yourself and your shit and your fucking, and you don't ever really get rid of it. It's always just this fucking story again, goddamn. Right? And you have to forgive yourself for that and all, and that's already enough. Why you got to make it that much harder? I don't want to be knocked into hell like this other metaphor, right? Like, I'd like it to just arise, and I go, oh, there it is, that's the thing that I do, and then it passes away. God, wouldn't that be nice? If I could live in forgiveness and kindness to myself and go, oh yeah, Joseph, there you are, doing your thing. Look at you.
There you are.
There you are. Right? How much better would it be if I could have some stability that could hold that? So life doesn't have to be so fucking salty.
Yeah, I really appreciate this. This has been a much more rich and deep and kind of broader your explanation and talk on all this. So for the mindful schools, so I am a certified mindfulness instructor.
You are. That's true. Yes.
You'll be glad to hear that the curriculum, within the curriculum, it's like a 12, 14 lesson curriculum, like they hand it out, right, for K through 6 and or K through 8 and then high school. It alternates week to week, in not a super overt, obvious way. Mindfulness, heartfulness, heartfulness, and the heartfulness is a little squeamish, especially for the boys, in the class. And this is why this was so rich and deep for me, because my explanation to them is the reason we do that is that stuff's coming up. You're looking at things that you may have been turning away from in your adolescence for years, and now we're sort of encouraging you to look at that by having you go into this stillness and silence, in a classroom, in a computer lab. I mean, it's like it's in the freaking classroom. Right. We're not on cushions or sitting at the desk.
Right, yeah.
And so that's hard. And so the next time we do it, we're gonna think about the first someone that you want to send some good well wishes to, and then basic various forms of loving kindness meditation. So
try this metaphor with the boys of the spear. Right? No, you're making your mind like a spear.
Yeah.
Like, like a strong, like a missile.
Yeah.
Right? Strong.
Yeah.
Right? And like things are just going to bounce off of it like a tank.
Yeah.
Or whatever,
Yeah.
Because he's talking to a bunch of young men.
Yeah.
Right? In the same sort of way, like, what?
Yeah.
Warriors. He's talking to warriors, guys who have been trained in the art of war.
That's a fantastic metaphor. I was reading today, just going, oh my God, yeah.
This is what allows me, this open-heartedness is what allows me to walk through the world fearlessly. Right? Like, we can teach it like that.
Yeah.
In a way that, and this is why I love these similes, right? The Buddha was a master of simile. And for his whatever audience he was teaching to, right? And so I think it's important that we bring some of this juiciness to it, and it also just makes practice so much more palatable, right? So that I'm not going to run screaming from the path when difficulty does come up, like you're saying, it's going to come up. It's going to come up. So how do I hold that? And you're right. I mean, that's the other problem with this article is it doesn't talk about how mindfulness research has moved forward and how it's actually taught with these other pieces and contexts. So in one sense, I liked that the article was there, and on the other sense, I felt like they didn't have a depth of understanding, which is normal with a lot of these internet articles because they've got 800 words that they've got to do sort of blog length because people's attention is short, and they've got to get clickbait, and they have a good title that draws people in and all of those things. So it lacks subtlety. It lacks depth of understanding. But I don't think it's something we should be afraid of. Cool. So new year, old charity. I'm just going to recycle my favorite charities of last year and just do them over again. I forget the name of it, but it's Los Angeles Women's Shelter or Los Angeles Women's Center or something like that. It's a wonderful program we supported last year in January, I believe, and they provide shelter for homeless women and job services and for a very vulnerable population, and it's a wonderful organization. I just got an email from them thanking us for last year's donation, probably to remind me to give them a new donation. So we're going to give them another donation. I'll put the link up on the website and try to send it out via email. If you want to support them independently, please do that. And 40% of our donations for the month will go to the Los Angeles Women's Center, if that's what it's called, or whatever, something like that. And we'll give them a donation again this year, and just I appreciate that, the work that they're doing.
What happened to the blood drive?
Me.
I thought so.
Yeah, mostly.
You were a tad busy.
I was busy finishing CP. It happened, and
right.
we gave a donation to American Red Cross, but we didn't end up doing a thing. So
Yeah.
I failed, and we'll try again next year.
It's not a fail. It came and went.
Oh no, it was.
I've never given blood before. I was going to do it.
I didn't follow through on the way that I wanted to. Is what happened.
There's
Yeah,
time.
it's okay. There's
We'll
room
circle
for
back.
there's room for growth in
Yes.
2020.
Yes.
Totally room for growth.
We're
Yeah.
circling back.
That's right. So we're gonna go back. We'll just go through the same charities again.
Yeah, it's
We'll
good.
do the same thing over again.
Start training for the 5K.
Start training for the 5K. Yeah, the Our House 5K in April. That's coming up. Dave ran it last
I
year.
ran it. I
You
walked
did.
most of it.
You ran a good portion of it, my friend. More than I did.
Walker ran the whole thing.
Yeah.
Myself, but yeah.
All right, before we head out tonight, let's sit together for a moment. May our discussion tonight be offered not as a discouragement for practice, but as an encouragement to deepen our understanding, to deepen our heart practice, our life practice. May the benefit of that discussion and that practice be offered freely to all beings. May all of us find a way to create the stability of kindness, to offer the generosity of our life's energy to all beings in all directions. Sadhu.
Right on.
That was yours.